Good day everyone, and welcome to this next presentation here at ABG Investor Seminar. My name is Victor Forsell. I am the research analyst here in the healthcare team, and we are actually very glad to have our latest addition to the research coverage here at the healthcare team. It's C-RAD with the CEO Tim Thurn and the CFO Henrik Bergentoft. Welcome guys, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for the introduction. So I will guide you through our presentation now. If we move on to the first slide, please, I would like to start with a short introduction to C-RAD. For those of you who don't know C-RAD, that will be new. Radiation therapy market overview is kind of the next point to put C-RAD a bit in the context of the overall market. I will move over to solution and products, our contribution to radiation therapy or cancer care. And then I will finalize my presentation with the business model and the growth strategy, and then take you through the financial highlights. So if we move on to the first slide, or next slide, rather, just very brief. The slide appears a little bit cut. I don't know if that's only on my end now, but okay. So C-RAD market cap roughly 2 billion SEK at the moment. Last year we had a revenue of around 220 million SEK, and then operating profit of 8%, translating into 17 million SEK. So with almost 60 people around the world, we are serving our customers and ultimately the patient to improve cancer care and improve the process within radiation therapy. If we move on to the next slide. So, I mean, if we look at the cancer care market, essentially there are three ways of how cancer is treated today. Surgery, chemotherapy or drug therapy, and then radiation therapy. Our focus, C-RAD's focus, is only on radiation therapy, and we are contributing with improving the safety and increase efficiency within radiation therapy. Next slide. So I think a very important pillar of assessing the the C-RAD case is whether or not this technology is on its way to become standard of care. And our clear assessment now is certainly that we are on this way. We have several indications that surface tracking is adopted as standard of care. And I think if we look at the tenders, especially here in the Western world, most of the tenders are including our positioning products or positioning products in general. So there is a demand in almost all tenders. Another point which is very important, that the major vendors have decided to secure access to this technology. I will come back to this later, because that's the opportunity for us to cooperate also with Elekta. If we look at the latest technology within radiation therapy, which is proton therapy, that's kind of the spearhead of radiation therapy. I think here, in basically all cases, positioning equipment is required. And as the last point, I would like to highlight here, I mean, the larger societies within radiation therapy, we name here the AAPM, but it's also ASTRO, came out with clear instructions, protocols, recommendations for customers how to operate with surface tracking in their space. So this is a very strong point where we believe that are underlying our assessment that this technology will become standard of care moving forward. If we go to the next slide. Just a quick overview about the radiation therapy market. I think what we can say, there are several market drivers. First of all, there is a huge capacity shortage of, according to the World Health Organization, around 10,000 linear accelerators, primarily in the emerging markets. I think if we look at the more advanced markets, it is primarily on the Linux side a replacement market, but that generates also a great opportunity for us to be part of this replacement cycle and bring our products into the mix. I think what we can also see, that radiation or the adoption of radiation therapy has been improving in general all over the world. So more and more patients are treated with radiation therapy over other techniques. And I think what is very important for our industry, or for our product specifically within the industry, is that there is a continuous push towards high precision beam delivery, which means that while the beam is delivered with high accuracy, also the patient needs to be positioned very accurately. And that's really what C-RAD brings to the table, ensuring that the tumor is in the right position at the right moment in time. Next slide. Victor? Excellent. So if we look at the opportunity, there are around 12,000, maybe a bit more than 12,000 Linux installed worldwide. And we assess the, for us, addressable market to be roughly 3/4 of these 12,000. So we can say around 9,000 linear accelerators are installed in what we call the advanced markets. That are the markets that we are addressing with our technology. I mentioned before that we assess the market or the surface tracking motion management to be on its way to become standard of care. What it means is that from our perspective, ultimately, the large majority of the machines in our addressable market will be equipped with surface tracking. So we say 75%, can be a bit more, somewhere between there and 100% ultimately. So if we look at the current market penetration from C-RAD, but also looking at our competitors altogether, we see that only 20% of the addressable market are equipped with surface tracking. Also, we need to conclude that C-RAD has been outperforming the market over the past year. We have been growing faster than our competitors. If we move on to the next slide. C-RAD has by now an installed base of around 630 systems. Another 130 systems are in the order backlog, so basically sold but not yet delivered. If we look at the market potential, I'm referring here a bit to the previous slide, the number of Linux that are to be equipped, around 5,500 Linux to be equipped, which is approximately a potential of 5 billion SEK. If we break this down on an annual basis, we can say roughly 12,000 Linux are sold on an annual basis, whereas 700 of this 1,200 are going in those markets where we assess customers to be interested in our technology. So that gives us a market potential of, on an annual basis, of roughly 1 billion crown. If we move on to the next slide. I think this slide very well displays the development that C-RAD has done, but with C-RAD also the overall market. I mean, this technology was very new in the beginning. When we brought it to the market, I think the big question for customers was, okay, why do we need surface tracking? Why do we need motion management? That has changed, and over the past years, the question is more, why do we need C-RAD? So I think what I'm saying is that the understanding in the market from the customer side is there that they need surface tracking. So now they are actually on the next level and look more at comparing the different vendors. And that was a very important step, again, in the context of this technology becoming standard of care. So we have been growing quite significantly over the past years. And I think, again, there is a great opportunity still out there for us to harvest. Next slide. If we look at the competitive landscape, essentially there are two main vendors, whereas C-RAD is, in terms of installed base and market share, the number 2 right now. We have a market share of approximately 30%, maybe slightly above. Then we have our main competitor, which is Vision IT, UK-based company, around 60%, and then approximately 10% are other vendors, or occupied by other vendors. I think what is important, however, is if we take a bit of a closer look, Vision IT became very strong through a cooperation that they had with Varian. Varian is the, in terms of Linux equipment, the largest vendor worldwide, and this cooperation ceased now 1-2 years ago. Since then they are focusing on direct sales as well as we had before. At the same time as they ceased their relationship with Varian, we engaged in a partnership with Elekta. So in currently 2, or including Japan, 3 markets, US and China, Elekta has our products in their price book, is able to offer the products along with their value proposition, along with their linac to their customer. And that's, of course, very important for us from a market access perspective. If we move on to the next slide. This slide puts C-RAD a bit in the context of the entire radiation therapy field. There are a few names here that probably appear familiar to you or are familiar to you. Elekta, Clear, Varian, I mentioned already, Mevion, IBA. Those companies, they are providing the treatment equipment. They are providing the equipment that is actually delivering the dose to the patient. Some of you might have heard about Research, Stockholm-based company. They are very much focusing on software, so their main product is the treatment planning part. Then there's dosimetry, and then the fourth segment here is the patient positioning space. And that is really the area, this sector where C-RAD is active, where we are positioning us with our current products. We move on. So this is another slide showing the development of surface tracking over the past years, and again in the context of this technology becoming standard of care. What we see on the left side is a diagram, a chart showing the different indications that are treated at a radiation therapy center. This is now based on US data, but can basically be applied also to Europe and also some Asian market. What we see, we don't need to go too much into details, but what we can see is that essentially there are no big changes in terms of the distribution of the various indications over the past 10, 11 years. And that's also our assessment that this will not change. So there are certain indications where radiation therapy is simply a good way of treating those cancer indications, and we assess the market to not change in that respect over the next years. What has, however, changed is, if we look in the middle of the slide, the implementation or adoption of surface tracking for the various indications. 5 years back or 6 years back, surface tracking was primarily used for breast patients. It is a large indication, roughly 20-25% of the patients that are walking into a radiation therapy center are breast cancer patients, so it was already a fairly large indication. But what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years is that the adoption has further increased, and by now more than 70% of the patients are benefiting from surface tracking if the system is installed. So that's basically showing the versatility. So it's not any longer a pure niche product, but rather a product that can be used on the large majority of the patient. Again, in the context of this becoming standard of care, a very relevant data point. If we move on. I mentioned initially the C-RAD value proposition is basically based on treatment efficiency on the one hand and accuracy improvements on the other hand. So in principle, the positioning accuracy is always a function of time, or time is a function of the accuracy. And what it means is essentially that there are different ways how patients are positioned. There are the lasers, which we see on the chart in the lower right corner. The lasers, which in principle is a fairly quick way of positioning the patient, but unfortunately the accuracy that can be achieved is also fairly limited. In some cases it's fine, but if we speak about high precision radiation therapy, it's certainly not sufficient anymore. If we look to the other end of the scale, what we call cone beam CT here, very high precision, but it takes quite some time. So, and C-RAD is positioned with the surface tracking products at the sweet spot where we achieve a very high accuracy, but do it also very quick. And that's important in certain markets. If we look in the Asian countries, they simply can't afford to take imaging methods that take so much time. So they are very much relying on having a quick way of positioning their patient, and by that improved accuracy and also patient throughput. In the Western countries here, where maybe the patient volume is not that critical, not that high, the focus is absolutely more on the accuracy side of things. We move on to the next slide. patient that is undergoing radiation therapy follows a very stringent process. The first step is imaging. Typically, a CT will be taken, a CT image will be taken, and a treatment plan is established. C-RAD is in the what we call imaging suite, represented with the Sentinel system, which is a system to monitor and track respiratory motion for two more indications that are affected by respiratory motion, which is breast, which is lung, partly liver, treat patients. If we move on to the next slide, we see the workflow in the radiation therapy room, which is really our main product, the Catalyst family in different versions for the photon therapy, but also proton or particle therapy. Some of you might have heard about Scandion Clinic. Scandion Clinic is one of these proton facilities. Again, it is important and used for those techniques where high precision radiation therapy is applied. Then accurate patient positioning is also required for the patient. If we move on, the clinical advantages of the C-RAD solution are it's dose-free, which is becoming more and more important because it reduces the side effects for the patient after the treatment. It's a non-invasive system, so high level of ease of use. It's markerless, translating into patient comfort on the one hand, but also for the therapist, or the one working with the patient and the system. It definitely has less impact on the daily workflow. This is becoming more and more important. C-RAD has put a lot of attention in integrating the system into the Linux system, into the record and verify system, so in the surrounding systems, in order to facilitate a smooth workflow. And last but not least, it is patient compliance. I mentioned earlier the versatility of the system. It can simply be used on a large number of patients. It's not a niche product anymore. It can be used on the large majority of the patients. Okay, next slide. So this is an attempt to show the clinical background, why this is becoming so important, and also what has developed in radiation therapy over the last years, and was creating the need for accurate patient positioning. So on the left side, we see a conventional treatment technique. Typically, the radiation beam is applied from different angles. In the middle, we see this so-called hotspot area, this square-formed area, and a subset of that area is the tumor. We see the red delineated part. So essentially what we can conclude is that the radiation beam is very well encapsulating the tumor, but we also need to acknowledge the fact that not only the tumor, but also other organs or the tissue around the tumor is very much affected. In this example, it is the bladder as well as the rectum. The disadvantage with applying radiation to those organs is simply that it will cause side effects. And as patients in general get older, their focus is to avoid side effects, to ensure a good quality of life for the patients even after the treatment. And therefore, what we see on the right side, more modern treatment techniques where the dose is delivered with very tight margins around the tumor. We see that the bladder and the rectum are more or less spared out, so there's no radiation or very limited radiation delivered to those organs. So the positive effect is simply that we reduce the side effects. The challenge that comes with this is that the patient motion becomes more crucial. So if the patient starts to move, the radiation will not be delivered to the tumor anymore, but rather to the surrounding tissues only. So the curative effect is gone, and we have again the side effects. And therefore, the positioning part is becoming so important, and that's why our products are required. Next slide. So we are continuously looking at expanding our technology. We are working on what we call workflow management. The last year we have released two products, brought two products to the market in that space. Here, without going too much into the details now, but the overall objective is to improve the efficiency even further and provide the customer with additional modules. that can be connected to our positioning system that I introduced on the earlier slides. Next slide. So the business model is pretty straightforward. We spoke about the market. It is cancer centers in advanced radiation therapy clinics, in what we call the advanced markets. We are approaching those sites, these customers, with essentially 3 sales channels. Direct sales, which is still the largest channel in terms of order volume. Then we look at the distributors in certain countries where we are not represented ourselves. We assign local independent resellers. And what is fairly new for us is these industrial partnerships. In this category, the Elekta Corporation is falling into this category. And that is really the important opportunity for us to be able to have Elekta or partners to present our products to their customers as part of a package together with their Linac. And we started with that in 2019 in the US. I think this cooperation has started very well. We added China to the territory as well in 2020. So we are starting to work there as well. And Japan is one of the other countries that we have already a cooperation in place with Elekta. So our focus is really the clinical and the product competence. We have outsourced all manufacturing to sub-suppliers that take care for the entire assembly process and ship the products to the customer where our people are showing up for service and installation. Next slide. One of the important parts of our business, or increasingly becoming important parts of our business, is the service business. We usually sell our product or offer our products together with service contracts. Typically, that's a long-term commitment from our customers at a certain percentage of the product, which is typically around 9%. As an annual fee, they become software updates, they become hardware replacement, spare parts, and service as needed. So on the right side, we see the distribution in the various regions. But we clearly need to point out that in the US, essentially all customers go for a service contract. In the EMEA region, the coverage is still less, but still growing. The APAC region is the situation is a little bit different. Markets, the more advanced markets like Japan and Australia, most customers have service contracts, but other markets like China, for example, the idea of signing up for a service contract is a bit more remote for most of the customers. We move on. So our strategy moving forward is based on the 3 pillars: product excellence, sales excellence, and service excellence. I think the main product, the catalyst product, the positioning product, is well developed. The applications are clearly defined. It is really a matter of us scaling up the business now. We have the clinical proof that the system does what it's supposed to do. So our objective is now to get the message out to as many customers as possible, combined with a long-term business component, which is the service contracts that I mentioned on the previous slide. Next slide. So if we just go quickly through the financial highlights from the first quarter this year, we had a quite significant growth on the order intake side. If we look at local currencies, almost 50% growth. Revenue grew with 16%, or in local currencies, 23%. We had a quite significant order backlog increase over the last year because, as a consequence of the pandemic, in certain areas we were not able to deliver as much systems as possible, simply because hospitals were to a large extent closed or access was limited. So the order backlog is increased basically by 30%. We had an operating profit of around 6 million SEK in the first quarter, which is fairly good for us. The first quarter is usually the weakest quarter. We see usually towards the end of the year stronger results. And if we move on to the next slide, we see the distribution in the different regions. I think what is very encouraging to see is that the business in North America picked up again. We had a fairly good fourth quarter, so end of last year. Now also good continuation in the first quarter this year. Also very encouraging to see is the performance that we have in the APEC countries. This is on the one hand China, but also the region or the countries outside China are developing very strong. Next slide. Here I'm coming back to the seasonality. It is typically so that we see a pattern that the second half of the year and specifically the fourth quarter is coming in very strong, both in terms of revenue, but specifically also on the order intake side. And that is due to the fact that most of our customers are public hospital or governmental funded hospital. They typically have their investment cycle or their budget cycle over the calendar year, and then towards the end of the year, investments are pursued. Next slide. Then quick look at the revenue distribution for the first quarter. Without going into all the details now, but I mean the APEC region developed very well over the last year. That's why we see also the fairly high order intake that we had on the previous slide, also translating in a pretty steep upwards leaning curve for the revenue. The US, we had a good fourth quarter, but quarter 1, 2, and 3 in the US were fairly difficult, simply because of COVID. That's why we don't have very impressive revenue from the Americas in the first quarter. So in general, I can say that we see a book and bill period, also the period between order intake and revenue, of around 6 months across all regions. Next slide. Yeah, and this is perhaps summarizing the growth story for C-RAD. We see both our revenue development over the past 3 or 4 years. We see also how our operating expenses have developed. And I think it is very simple. I mean, we reached a point where the technology is adopted by our customers. We are simply growing revenues right now faster than we need to grow our operating expenses. Next slide.
Tim, it's Victor here. I think we're actually starting to running out of time. So if you have any final comments, that would be great to conclude this presentation with.
Absolutely. Just to mention, I mean, I think we are overall very much exposed to very volatile environment, both on the order intake, but also on the revenue side. But if we go to the last slide, I think to sum up the C-RAD case, I mean, we have a proven and now also recognized product essentially worldwide. We have comprehensive market access. Our direct sales force, which is currently still standing for the lion's share of our orders, but then also a very good development in terms of our industrial partnerships. I mentioned the Elekta Corporation in this context is helping us to further grow our business. I want to highlight, and that's very important, I mean, we are firmly convinced that this technology is becoming standard of care. So it is now a matter of scaling up the business, rolling out this technology to our customers. And final comment here, we have a very stable financial platform. The company is debt-free, and we have around 100 million SEK in cash on the bank right now. So this gives us, of course, a degree of freedom to further grow the company. So that was the last slide. I managed in 30 minutes, sorry. But Victor, if there is a question, please go ahead.
I think that we are actually running out of time here, Tim. So with that, I think I'll have to thank you so much for that thorough presentation of yours, and thank you so much for joining us, and good luck to you in the future, and let's see what C-RAD can bring to this market ahead as well. Thank you so much.
And good luck to you as well. Thank you.